This is the third video I've recorded this morning, so just bear with me. It's gonna be a doozy. Hey, what's up? My name is John Bonjour. I'm an artist and a film enthusiast, and I have drawn some artwork, and we'll be continuing my retrospective series for Halloween. This time we're talking about Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. Fun fact, those titles basically don't apply to either of those movies, so I keep getting them mixed up. So here we go, let's dive in. All right, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers came out in 1989, and it was directed by Dominique Othenin Gerard. One of those is right. This was a movie that I deeply hated the first time I saw it. Thought it was terrible. And now I only hate it just a little bit. I just hate it just a tiny little bit. I don't like this movie. I really don't. I don't think it's terrible. I just think it's pretty not great. I will say my just overall thought is that it gets better the longer you watch it. So it starts out truly horrendous, and then the further it goes, the better it gets. 4, 5, and 6 are kind of the Thorn trilogy, the Cult of Thorn. I've never totally gotten it. I'll get more into that, especially as we talk about the end of 5 and then 6 for sure. I'm sure it's for somebody. It's not me. This one also sets up a lot that I think conceptually is really interesting, and then the further it goes on, especially into 6, it just doesn't mean anything. It just never becomes anything. Jumping right in, my favorite kill is Rachel, which is a little bit counterproductive because I'm disappointed that they killed her so early. I just think her kill is interesting. Michael is stalking her through her house for like 10, 20 solid minutes. Really creepy. Honestly, that scene, pretty good. It's a good start-ish to the movie. I think it's really solid, and it's probably the best kill in the movie. Not so much because it's gory, but just because it's surprising. And I think the idea of him just being in the house, it reminds me a lot of like the Strangers movie. Michael is just kind of looming in the background, and then eventually he kills. Solid scene. I'm also going to give a runner-up to the barn kills. Maybe the only other kills in the movie. I don't totally remember. I'm sure other people die. It's really the only notable ones. The scythe is such a great ad. It's such a cool image. It's so disappointing to me that he uses it once and we really barely get to see it. It's such an interesting concept and such a cool thing, cool visual. And the fact that it's on screen for like maybe 3 minutes, super disappointing. But either way, those kills are really good. I'll always enjoy some people, getting nasty. And then the guy gets just like stabbed through. That happens in so many movies and it never gets old. It really doesn't. It's always quite good. Side note, complete side note, has nothing to do with Halloween. Best example of that is in the movie Studio 666. And if you know, you know. Watch that movie if you haven't. It's really funny. It's got Dave Grohl in it. All the other Foo Fighters guys. It's a great movie, actually. It's really fun. Anyway, Halloween. This is a video about Halloween, not Studio 666. Unless you wanted to talk about... No, okay, no, Halloween. Yeah, you're right, Halloween. All right, positives for Halloween 5. There's quite a few. Honestly, like I said, really toward the end, middle to the end. This movie's really solid. Now, if you've watched any of my other Halloween retrospective videos, then you know this was coming. Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence, is at his all-time craziest in this movie. He's just shouting at kids left and right. He's screaming at Jamie, just like putting all of the guilt of every murder that's ever happened in the history of the universe on her. And he's like, do you want it to happen again? I cannot express to you how happy Dr. Loomis makes me, especially in this movie. I've really enjoyed watching through this series, knowing that he gets to this just like full-blown psycho stage. It's so great. It makes almost no sense for his character. It's just so funny to me, and Donald Pleasence puts his entire soul into this performance. It's art. It's beautiful. Speaking of just acting your ass off, Danielle Harris is tremendous in this movie. She's really good. And we'll get to this in part 6, but it's a real shame that we don't get to see her character kind of grow. I know people have talked a lot about after, Halloween ends, do we want to do a Halloween 3 sequel, or do we want to follow up on the Thorn trilogy? I mean, if you can get her back, I would do more Thorn. That would be enough to make me interested to see what they would do with it. If she's not coming back, there is literally no point. But all that to say, especially for a child actor, she is really, really good. And then she's just continued in other stuff to be really great. I appreciate her character quite a bit. The first time I watched these movies, I really didn't. I think she's grown on me quite a lot. I really like what she brings to the table. Her whole almost psychic connection with Michael is really interesting, and the fact that she's not like directly related, but pretty tangentially related, that just makes it an interesting thing. It shows a lot about Michael, and it shows a lot about her, that she's resilient enough to survive it. Also, she doesn't talk for the first like 40 minutes of this movie or so. Interesting choice. Other positives, Michael's mask looks pretty good. There's kind of a weird thing where it becomes like a shark fin at the bottom, but otherwise it looks pretty good, and in certain lights it looks really good. At least this looks like they made a mask and didn't just go, oh shoot, we gotta buy a mask from Party City. Like, it looks like they put some thought into how this mask works. Not my favorite, but I think it's good. The portrayal of Michael is, we're in that kind of era where he's just a guy who walks around now. He gets a little bit of the Jason Voorhees stumble and grab it stuff kind of thing. Not my favorite, not terrible. I can live with it. He is a Michael Myers. He's just not like super notable. There's a tremendous line, hell would not have him. That's another really big positive. The whole kind of last section of the movie, everything from the Myers house through the police station that gets just like exploded and Jamie walking through all the dead cop bodies, really, really good. I think that's where this movie should have been. That's where it should have lived. And instead it lives mostly in just like kind of a nothing movie where not a lot happens. There is another death because one of the, like, that weird greaser kid gets killed. That was pretty good. It was pretty right. Is that even this movie? Anyway, pretty solid. Some of the characters are fine. There's not like a ton of positives for this one, but what works really works. And I think the back third works really, really well. Now on to my negatives for this movie. Most notably, this is a dumb movie. This is a really stupid movie. This opens with Myers army crawling into a river and just floating down, which I know that they didn't intend that to be funny, but it really, really is. He looks like an otter. The biggest sin this movie commits is looking like it was shot in the middle of July. Like most Halloween movies, the bare minimum, you get the vibe right. The vibe is not right in this movie, okay? The vibe is bad. The vibe is hot. I want that shirt. I want that on a t-shirt. The vibe is hot. It doesn't look or feel like Halloween. We've seen Halloween in Haddonfield, and this is not it. Like, there's green grass. There are 0 leaves falling off of the trees. I don't know what happened. I don't know why you would ever choose that, because it's like, it's a Halloween movie. This does feel like the budget was significantly smaller, or perhaps maybe just allocated differently toward the explosion of several hundred cops. So maybe that's what it was, is they just had to shoot some stuff in a not ideal time. But to me, that is what makes or breaks a Halloween movie, is the energy that it brings. And the energy that this brings, it feels like, you know what? It feels like a Scream movie. I just put that together. This feels, especially early on, like a Scream movie. Not a good thing for a Halloween movie to feel like. Not a bad thing for a Scream movie, but not a good thing for a Halloween movie. There's also like such a weird moment. This is where I start getting into things. I never want to trash these movies too hard, because all of them feel like somebody had a direction that they wanted to take, and then somebody in the big studio cloud that makes all the decisions for these creative people said, what if instead of your cool, like, interesting concept, what if instead of that, we put a bunch of cartoon sounds when the cops come down the stairs? Like, what a strange decision. I had to back it up just to make sure that that wasn't like a ringtone going on around me. Like, that's in the movie. They're walking down and there are full-blown Looney Tunes sounds. And if you compare that weird opening for the cops to the systematic destruction of a police force at the end of this movie, super light and weird and funny, but not in a good way, like really uncomfortably cheesy, and then dark and gloomy and like really kind of depressing. These are not cohesive. This is not like making a point. It just feels like somebody went, we should put sounds to that, because it's literally, I have no idea why they would do that. I keep trying to justify it in my mind. In fact, it's kind of lived in my brain since I watched this movie. It makes no sense. It feels like in The Man with the Golden Gun, where they do the coolest car stunt maybe ever put to film, where they take the car, they drive it over, and they flip it around like midair and then land it somewhere else. And then they put a slide whistle to that because they, I guess, hate cool things. This is a similar decision where, like, I cannot fathom the kind of mental state you need to be in to think that that's a good idea. Oh, and I completely forgot, it fully retcons Halloween 4's ending, which is where Jamie Lloyd is like maybe a murderer now. Super dark, super interesting ending. This one goes, this is like a dream. Like, just don't worry about it. She's fine. Everything's fine. This trilogy of movies is so non-cohesive that it feels like they made that movie and then they went, well, we don't know where to go from there, so what if we just wrote a Halloween movie and then pretended it didn't happen? I feel like 6 does the same thing. It's really disappointing because there is a version of this movie, of this trilogy, the Cult of Thorn thing. There's a version of that works really well somewhere in the multiverse. It is not these 3 movies. I could see something that connects the energies of Halloween 1 and 2 and Halloween 3, kind of blending them together, making Michael this sort of cult horror piece. I think that's an interesting concept, but they just didn't do it. They didn't do any of that. And it feels like they just never follow up with what they set up. Great example, there's the Men in Black in this movie, and quite honestly, he shows up and my first thought was, oh, this guy's interesting. I wonder what's going on here. And then I remembered that they just fully beef it by the end of this series. He's such a non-character, and it's really disappointing. Anyway, that does kind of lead me into my final thoughts on Halloween 5. At some point in the runtime, it remembers that it's a Halloween movie. It really does. And when it does, I think it does a pretty decent job of it. The scenes set at night, it's not as noticeable that it's midsummer. A lot of it works, especially toward the end. It's just such a shame that more of it doesn't work. I just wish this was a better movie because I can see what they were going for, and I just don't think they quite hit what they had in mind. Welcome back. Let's talk about Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, directed by Joe Chappelle, and it came out in 1995. Yes. I gotta be honest, this is a movie that I really enjoy. I forgot how much I liked it, and then I watched it again for this. It's a hot mess of a movie, but it's really fun, and I really appreciate what it brings to the table, that it does something different, and that it feels more like Halloween. Just like I was talking about with 5, this one actually has the vibes of Halloween. It feels cold and crisp, like a Halloween would. You know, like October does. Anyway, we're on Halloween 6. So my favorite kill in Halloween 6 is John Strode. He gets electrocuted. It's pretty good. That is a weird thing about this movie. The kills are not tremendous. There's not a ton of them, and they're not great. This one is probably my favorite just because John Strode sucks. He's a bad man. He's a bad dad, and he's a bad man. And also, I'm pretty sure, I gotta be honest, I tried to look it up and I couldn't figure it out, but I'm pretty sure he's the one who's in the tree when that kid is just singing, "Mommy, it's raining red." Something is wrong with that kid, by the way. I'm worried about her. But either way, that's a great scene. The discovery of that body is super interesting to me. I have no concept of how he got up there. I mean, I know like Michael did it, but just like why? For what purpose? Like, what do you gain from that? Like I said, not a ton to choose from, but that's probably my favorite. Notable positives for this movie: Paul Rudd as Tommy Doyle. Choice. Love it. I think that's great. I like that they're bringing things back. You know, it's interesting to see what was Tommy up to. Like, what happened between then and now, and why is he just like a full-blown psycho? Michael is back to being imposing. The way that he's acted, the way he walks around, he feels like a presence of evil. He's not just like a guy in a suit. Like, he's back to being Michael again. I have such mixed feelings about the Cult of Thorn. I think the best thing that ever happened to this Cult of Thorn trilogy is other movies coming after it. I've got this theory that if it's the last movie that happened, if there's weird choices or things that aren't as good, people will be like super hard on it because it's the most recent thing. Recency bias is a real thing, I think, for positive and negative. An interesting example of that is Halloween Ends. We'll get to that in a future video, but I think when inevitably another Halloween comes out, Halloween Ends won't be hated as much as it is. In fact, I think it's going to start to be loved just because it's not the most recent thing, and that means people can actually look at it and just accept it for what it is. And it's not the most important thing, because the most important thing is the thing happening now. And I think that's what benefits the Cult of Thorn movies. A lot of it doesn't work, but that's okay because some of it does. And that's what I like about this movie, is that quite a bit of it does work. My final and most sad positive is Dr. Loomis. Donald Pleasance, I believe this movie was put in his memory. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he puts in a really interesting performance. He's a lot more subdued. He's not as zany. It's his last performance of Loomis for sure. I don't know if it's his last performance of all time. But you feel that remorse on him. You feel that character, the weight of all the things that have happened. He feels much more akin to 1, 2, and 4's Loomis, and way less like 5's very shouty Loomis. I also appreciate that just as this movie goes on, he gets a chance to have his kind of last stand with Michael. I'm really glad that Pleasance got a chance to fulfill that role that he's been building this whole time. He's just so good. As this is the last time that I'll be saying this, it's probably not. Donald Pleasance was a gem, and I cannot appreciate enough what he brings to the Halloween franchise. Now, let's lighten the mood a little bit and talk about some of the worst things about this movie. It is such a bummer that Danielle Harris didn't get to come back. It's also a bummer that they just kill Jamie Lloyd. Stupid. I don't know why this franchise keeps doing that. They keep having a character that we care about, and then the beginning of the next one, they're like, what if we just killed him? I don't think that's a good trope. I don't think that's a good, way to connect you to anything in this movie. It just makes you feel a little bit more dissociated on this new one. But it's a shame that she couldn't come back. Apparently, she asked for a certain amount of money and they weren't willing to pay it. From what I have looked into, did not seem like an unreasonable amount of money, and it sucks. Yeah, it sucks a lot that they didn't pay that. There's a lot of studio meddling in these movies, and this is just another example of that. But there is a small part of my soul that wants Danielle Harris to come back to the Halloween franchise just to finish it out, just to get something important, something that really means something. I think she deserves a chance to really be that character that she built, kind of like Donald Pleasance. And it's a shame that they were just like, oh, we'll just get somebody else. So much so that I had to look it up to make sure that that was actually Jamie Lloyd. It's very confusing watching these back to back, especially if they're gonna kill them off so quickly. It's not like changing who Rachel is in The Dark Knight. That you can understand because she has the whole movie to become this character and, become the definitive version of that character. Not in this one. It feels like they just got a stunt double to become Jamie Lloyd for the 4 scenes that they had before they killed her off in this train station. It's just such an ill-advised idea, and I'll never totally understand why they did it. But whatever, it is what it is. Other kind of negatives, the Cult of Thorn just does nothing for me. I understand what they're going for. I get what they're trying to do. I cannot convince myself to be interested in that concept. I just don't think Michael Myers needs to have some major supernatural force at work. I think he works pretty well as just a presence of evil or just a guy. And both of those are good. You don't need a whole cult to make it happen. There doesn't need to be a big ritual. Speaking of which, in a long, long line of bad decisions that both the franchise and this movie have made, making Michael Myers the father to his niece's baby is probably the worst thing they could have done. I understand he's a horror character. They're supposed to be gross. Not that kind of gross, though. That's so outside of Myers' character. The idea that he could even... This is so gross. This is such a gross thought, but the idea that he could even get it up is just insane to me. That's not what this character's for, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's just such a weird, dark thing to put in this movie that doesn't add anything. It just kind of sucks that that's what they chose to focus on, but then not really focus on it. They just sort of present some concepts throughout the movies and go, isn't that interesting? I don't know, let's keep moving. And then just out of obligation, it feels like they have some kills. That gets us to my final thoughts on Halloween 6. I like it. I like this movie a lot. Paul Rudd is great. All the other characters are there. Michael is really well done. I think that this is a solid movie. It's for sure not perfect. It's not even close to perfect, but it feels more like a Halloween movie than some of the other ones have, and I'll give it credit for that. I will say it does seem incredibly reactionary to some of the criticisms that people had for the first series, and I don't know if that's a particularly good thing. I think that can be good. It's wise for a movie studio and people who are making these series it's wise to listen to criticism and maybe adjust what you do with that. But this feels like DCEU level reactionary, where they're like, oh, you didn't like that? Okay, well, we're just gonna, I don't know, we're gonna make an Avengers movie. We're just gonna do the Avengers. And then they like have a Suicide Squad, and they're like, what, we can make that Guardians. And the people who made the Suicide Squad were like, but it's not Guardians. And they were like, yeah, but we could try though. Just put a lot of music in there. That's what this movie feels like. It feels like they wanted to go somewhere with the Man in Black, with the Cult of Thorn, with all of that. And instead of doing anything with it, they just decided like, okay, people didn't like that. People didn't like the mystery of the Man in Black. They wanted to know what it was. What if it was just a guy who works with Loomis? Just a guy who, what if he was just a guy? And there was just a cult. We're just going to explain the whole cult, but it makes no sense. I don't like that about the movie, but I appreciate that it feels more like an original Halloween movie and that it's trying to try something. Maybe it doesn't work, but it's trying something. And I really do, I can value that on a higher scale than I can Part 5, which just feels like monotonous going around doing whatever because you have to. So yeah, I like this movie. It's a little bit of a guilty pleasure. It's not great, but I think it's really fun. Thank you for watching this video and checking out my channel. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on the Halloween franchise, stay tuned because I'm doing a whole other series of these retrospective videos. If you want to hear my thoughts on other movies, comics, TV shows, anything else, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, comment down below what you'd like me to review or what you think of Halloween 5 and 6. Or do none of those things because I am not your dad. Dr. Michael, nope.